Good morning, everyone, or afternoon if you're watching in the afternoon. My name is Alex Fournette, giving you the first ever edition of our segment called Flyera Gonna Flyera, where I'm going to be going over today quite a few things going in line with the Flyers, giving you a little season review, where the Flyers currently stand right now in their playoff situation, and they're pretty slim, but not 100% over hopes at the playoffs. Going to go a little further down the season, a little month by month breakdown where I get to actually give you some in depth analysis of pretty much how the teams performed throughout the year, players that I think have taken significant step forwards, players who have had disappointing seasons, who I believe is pretty much the team MVP this year, and maybe a look into the future of what's going on with the offseason, maybe give my own personal little breakdown and prediction of what I expect for next season. So, folks, my name is Alex. As I said before, let's jump right into this. Leading off, we are now 80 games into the season where the Philadelphia Flyers are currently 37, 32, and 11. 2 games left in said season. So they're in a battle for the playoffs right now. We have still 5 teams fighting for 2 playoff spots between the Philadelphia Flyers, Pittsburgh Penguins, Washington Capitals, New York Islanders, and Detroit Red Wings. A lot better off position than I thought they'd be this year. Last year, they ended up, I believe it was with 75 points, if I remember off the top of my head. This year, they've taken a 10-point leap. They're up to 85 still with 2 games to play. So, but obviously with their recent 8-game skid that was just snapped Thursday against the Rangers, we're in the outside looking in right now. But let me give you a little breakdown of where they stand right now. Philadelphia Flyers currently behind every team they need to pass right now. They are the 3rd team out of the playoffs, 85 points, 80 games played, in a tie with the Washington Capitals and the Detroit Red Wings at 85 points as well, but they each have 3 games to go. Meanwhile, the Pittsburgh Penguins at 86 points, also at 79 games played, have 3 games to go. And then the New York Islanders, also at 79 games played, have 3 games to go at 89 points. So, it's a little bit bleak situation right now. The Flyers do not control their own destiny. They're going to need some help. I thought the season was completely done after they honestly, I'll go a step further, not just the Montreal game. When you take a step back to the Columbus Blue Jackets game where they lost 6-1 against a team that probably put out a roster who half the guys I couldn't even name that night, and including an AHL goalie who was making his debut that night, it seemed like all was lost. They were in a position where they no longer controlled their own destiny at that point. And we were in a spot where it's like, okay, we might be looking at the draft simulation point now. But you know what? That's not fun at this point. I still want to see if there's any real shot at them making the playoffs. So I'm going to give a little bit of a breakdown of how that path is possible and what I think is deemed the easiest path for them to get in. So let's start with the Flyers themselves. Biggest primary thing, starting with this, they have to win their final 2 games in regulation, not in overtime. In regulation. Reason why, this is for the easiest path. There is a way in if they win 1 or 2 of these games, even in overtime, but they have to win both of them is the point. But reason why I say specifically regulation is because there is a very high probability that tiebreakers will be brought into perspective if they win both of these games. And they currently hold the tiebreaker, thankfully, over 3 out of 4 of these teams. The Islanders, the Capitals, and the Red Wings, if they would win both those games in regulation, that is. First round tiebreaker in the NHL playoff format is indeed regulation wins, in which the Philadelphia Flyers currently have 29, which is at the moment the same exact as the Washington Capitals. And I believe they're 2 ahead of the Detroit Red Wings and 1 ahead of the New York Islanders. But Islanders, I kind of feel like are out of this picture. It would take a lot and then some just to catch them. But I'm going to stick with the easiest path. So, with that being said, Philadelphia Flyers, easiest path there. As I stated, win those first 2 games in regulation. Up next, the Detroit Red Wings. They have to lose one of their final 3 games in regulation or 2 in overtime. I think the the former is probably more likely. Red Wings' final 3 games are at Toronto and then a home and home with the Montreal Canadiens. So they're going to need some help in that perspective. If they do not get a Detroit loss from one of those 3 games in regulation, it is almost a foregone conclusion they don't get in, barring a few extra stuff. And then the third thing to find the easiest path to get in would be the Pittsburgh Penguins losing 2 out of their final 3 games in regulation. That's going to be probably, in my opinion, the most difficult. Pittsburgh's playing extremely good hockey right now. They're 7-0-3 in their last 10 games. Sidney Crosby seems like he is determined to carry that team to the playoffs. They're getting help from Malkin and Russ, Letang, Carlson. Their goaltending has been pretty damn stellar outside of that last game against Detroit when they won 6-5, but they allowed 2 greasy ones off of some ugly plays by Letang and Carlson late, but besides the point. But Pittsburgh's last 3 games are against Boston, Nashville, and the Islanders. So they have to lose 2 out of those 3 games in regulation, which with that schedule is possible. All 3 of those teams are in the playoffs. However, there's a real chance 2 of them will have nothing to play for. With that being said, I consider today, the day I'm recording this, April 13th, Saturday, a day where the Penguins have to lose to Boston. That is a must-lose game for them in regulation. If they win that game, I just can't see them losing to both the Islanders and the Predators in regulation, especially with those 2 teams. Predators are almost practically locked into that wild card 1. It's very unlikely that they end up moving, and I don't think they're going to really have too much to play for. They may rest some of their top-end guys. Could see Yossi get a day. Could see Saros sit for a game. Forsberg potentially sit. Guys like that, which could really alter how that game ends up flowing. And then the Islanders, who I'll mention who their remaining games are in a moment, have 3 games remaining as well. But if they win today, they do indeed clinch a playoff spot. So, thankfully, they do play the New York Rangers, so that is anything but a given. So if the Islanders do win today, they may not have as much to play for in this as well. So, which makes me think, okay, Pens have to lose to Boston today. If they do not, I cannot see them losing both of those games to both the Preds and the Isles. They might get lucky and lose one of them. But, yeah, so the easiest path. Now, even though the Capitals have a game in hand on us and we're tied with them in points, you're probably wondering, why don't the Caps have to lose anything? Simple fact, they still control their own destiny over the Capitals because their final game of the year is against those actual Washington Capitals. So with that being said, if the Flyers win both of their games in regulation, Washington then ends up ending tied with them in points and in games played. So you look into the tiebreakers list, they'd be tied in regulation wins, assuming Washington wins both of those in regulation. If they win one in overtime, then that's the end of the tiebreaker right there. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, Washington wins both of those games in regulation. Next tiebreaker is regulation overtime wins. They'd be tied in that as well. I believe it'd be at 33. They'd be tied in overall wins, I believe, at 39. So the final tiebreaker after that, actually it's not the final one, but the next one, would be points won in the head-to-head series, in which if the Flyers were to win that game in regulation, which is why I put so much emphasis on it, they would win the season series points game 4-3, which would propel them ahead of the Washington Capitals. So they could technically control their own destiny over Washington. They can get in if they win their final 2 games and the Islanders lose all 3 of their final games. They've already locked the tiebreaker over the Islanders, so it doesn't matter how they win those. But they would need the Isles to lose all 3 in regulation, still one of Pittsburgh and Detroit scenarios to happen as well. I don't think the Islanders, especially on a 6-game winning streak right now, are going to lose all 3 of their games. In fact, they don't even have to lose all 3. They only have to get 1 point. If they get that, they're in. Doesn't matter. I mean, they're ending ahead of the Flyers. Doesn't matter. maybe not necessarily in, but ending ahead of us. So I don't see the Isles losing 3 straight regulation. Their final 3 games are against the Rangers, Devils, and Penguins. Could happen, but rather unlikely with the hockey that they're playing right now. So, easiest path to get in one last time. Philadelphia Flyers win both of their games in regulation. Detroit Red Wings lose 1 of their final 3 in regulation. Pittsburgh Penguins lose 2 out of their final 3 in regulation. That happens no matter what. The Philadelphia Flyers will clinch the wild card too and make the playoffs. Hopefully they win today. They play against the New Jersey Devils. They're honoring Wayne Simmons today, who was one of my favorite Flyers growing up as a kid. Actually, not as a kid, but as a young adult. So I really hope they come out and play hard today, play the style of hockey Wayne Simmons gave to the city of Philadelphia over the last 8 years of his career that he was here. So hopefully they get this dub, and we're still talking about a potential playoff path on Saturday. If they lose today and Pittsburgh wins in any fashion, they are mathematically eliminated. Doesn't matter. So today is a must win, simply put. But anyway, with that being said, we're going to move on. Let's do a little season recap. So this season has been interesting. The Flyers were a very streaky team this year when you look into perspective. They started this year off quite interesting, to say the least. Opened up the season 5-7-1, where they came out of the gates with a win against Columbus and then kind of faltered a little bit. We're kind of up and down until they went on that West Coast road trip. They went to San Jose and lost, giving the Sharks their first win of the season, of course, because it's always us. Whenever a team's on a massive losing streak, it's always the Flyers and then that type of streak. Flyers then dropped to 5-7-1, but I think after that, something kind of clicked. They spanked off 5 straight wins, pulling off road wins after that against Anaheim, the Kings, and Carolina, and then back-to-back wins against Vegas and Columbus. A handful of quality wins in that run. The Kings, Carolina, and Vegas, all good teams, all currently going to make the playoffs. So that was a nice little important stretch to them. Kind of faltered a little after that, losing 4 out of the next 5 in November. Then another switch was flipped in December. They go on a nice streak starting December 2nd, where they go on a 7-0-1 run, starting with back-to-back wins over the Penguins. And then the theme of this year, I have to say, the Flyers dominated the Western Conference, completely dominated it. They were so good against the teams against the West. Some of these games, just to go a little bit ahead of this, they swept Vancouver, who was fighting for the President's Trophy for a good chunk of the year. They swept Winnipeg, who is pretty much, I believe, locked into a first-round series with the Colorado Avalanche. So those are 2 high-quality teams. They beat Colorado on the road, another really good team, as I just mentioned. They took one from the Kings, another good team. They beat Vegas once, and the other game that they lost in Vegas, they lost in the final 30 seconds. But not to go too far off track, in December, the Flyers went on that 7-0-1 run, ended up getting them into a playoff spot during that run, in which they held on to for 4 months. They were pretty good after that. Did go on a little bit of a step back after that. Ended up going losing 5 of 6 after that. Losing to the teams like Nashville, Detroit, and then had that dreaded Western Canada trip that they always seem like they falter in. Lost games to Calgary and Edmonton. Lost a game in Seattle in there too. And then they came back after that, lost to Columbus at home in a shootout in a game that they kind of dominated in. And then until the third, they kind of ran out of gas. Something our producer Rick mentioned that I always think is pretty true looking back at it. West Coast team coming east after a long road trip, coming back home after that. They do always seem like looking into things that they always have a tough first game back, and that ended up being the case against them. But yeah, after that, they ended up going another 5-game win streak after that, a little bit down the road with wins against Montreal, Winnipeg, Minnesota, St. Louis, and Dallas. Again, just steamrolling through the Western Conference, which, again, just seemed like the theme after that, and then flipped right into a 5-game losing streak right going into the break. Now, when that happened, began that craziest month of the year in January, where the Carter Hart situation happened. We were wondering when that the Hockey Canada investigation from 2018 was going to drop, and unfortunately, it happened mid-season, and Carter Hart was one of the 5 people on the list. He was gone for good. You know what? Good riddance. You did that. You don't deserve to be here. I do not want you in the orange and black in general. So that was the end of that after that Colorado game. And then a little bit before that, I should have probably did this vice versa order. We had the Cutter Gauthier saga, where this guy was the number 2 prospect in Philly's pool. He was a top 10 prospect. I was so elated to watch this guy. He was dominating BC for a year and a half under our wing. This guy looked like he was going to be coming here, being a bona fide point per game guy when he hits his prime. He'll be a 30, 40 plus goal scorer, future first line talent. But little did we know, behind the scenes, not all was happy with him and the Flyers brass. He put in a trade request to the shock of us all. And it's crazy how well Briere and Jones did to keep this under whims without anyone even knowing about it. But yeah, Briere and Jones were floored by this. And the big thing from this Cutter Gauthier situation was, from what it seems like, not 1,000% confirmed, but all but unconfirmed at this point. The Flyers didn't want to sign him instantly to an ELC in March because of their overage issues, but they said they're going to sign him in May. And for some reason, that ruffled his feathers the wrong way, to the point that he wanted out when they talked to him again in May. And it's a really weird situation when you look back at this, because I understand you're not happy that you're going to get that first year out of your ELC burned, because I get it. You want to get paid. You don't want to be making chump change for a few years, and you want to get that burned as quick as possible, get that real first contract. But to lead to the point where you don't even want to communicate with the team as to why, you don't even tell the team as to why, you're pretty much giving them the cold shoulder, to the point that Briere and Jones traveled out to Sweden during the World Tourney out overseas to try and talk to this guy, where him and his agent said, I want nothing to do with you. We don't want to be here. He's not talking to you, for an 8-month saga, to the point where they finally did eventually trade him in January, where they got, for the situation they were in, a pretty respectable return. They traded him to Anaheim for, obviously, Jamie Drysdale, former number 6 overall pick in the 2020 NHL draft. Still a raw talent, but speed is there. Stick handling is there. This looks like a kid that's going to be part of the Flyers' future for quite some time. I like what I see with him. He can cut quick. He's smart. He's still raw. So he's got a lot to learn. He's sometimes out of position, stuff that can be coached. He sometimes, makes a bad pass. You're like, oh geez. But I have a high bar for this kid. I think he's going to be good. I think he's going to be a future potential number 2 defenseman. But it kind of stinks how everything happened with Cutter Gauthier, because this was a guy that we all looked forward to seeing to play with Matvei Michkov later down the line. Didn't end up happening as stated. So, with that being said, he's now in Anaheim, no longer here, but Flyers move on. But with all that being said, and obviously Carter Hart's situation happens, they hit that 5-game losing streak, with Sam Ersson ends up taking the reins in net. And, the situation he was thrown into, he did a fabulous job. He did a very good job, and I have no issue with how he played even later down the stretch, which we'll get into. So, as I stated prior, Flyers went on a 5-game losing streak to go into the All-Star break. They come back, get a little bit of rest, and then whip off 3 straight. 2 more against playoff teams at Florida, who's a team they've beaten twice this year, both times in Florida. Home against Winnipeg, and then home against Seattle. Then after that, it was kind of back and forth hockey. They never really got into another nice groove after that. Lost back-to-back against Pittsburgh and the Rangers. Beat Tampa to end the February. To end February in a game that they dominated the third period in. So March comes along. They're still in the number 3 spot in the Metro. They're looking pretty good for a playoff position. They're looking like at the end of the day, as long as they're bare minimum playing 500 hockey, the way the teams behind them are playing, I think they had about a 6-7 game edge at this point. But unfortunately, it was a lot of back and forth hockey again for, another 3 weeks. When it lost to Washington in a game they were up 2-0 in the first. Then they beat Ottawa in a game that kind of was shaky, even though they won. Lost in a shootout to St. Louis, beat Florida again, got absolutely demolished by Tampa in a game I personally attended in Tampa Bay, and that was, in my opinion, the worst game of the year. Of course, I went to it. Go figure. Come home, beat San Jose in a game you didn't even really convincingly beat them. They just didn't really ever find that base that they were at when they were running the 2 goalie tandem afterwards. And they were treading water, but they were hanging in there. They lose. Then they go on that 7-game grind where they're on a 7-game gauntlet. They played Toronto twice. They played Boston twice, Carolina, Florida, and the Rangers. And they went 2-3-2 in this gauntlet. They looked decent, but there was a lot of things at the end of the day that I don't say it was bad, but they never really, again, could quite hit that base. Outside that Toronto game, they did keep up with a lot of teams. They played with them well, but getting 6 out of 14 points looked good there. And then at that point, I'm saying, okay, now they got a lot of teams that she should easily beat coming up. Montreal twice, Columbus, Chicago, Buffalo. The Isles is a somewhat tough game. And the wheels fell off. I don't know what it was, but from that first Montreal game on, the wheels just completely fell off. During that 8-game losing streak, they allowed 4 or more goals every single game. And you're not beating many, if anyone, allowing 4+ goals every single game. They go on to lose 8 straight. It was the last 2 games of that grind of a run where they had that 7-game gauntlet where it started. They vastly outplayed Florida in that first game, a team that was just coming off a back-to-back. We were too that night, but ours was a day game, where they got goalied by Stolarz. Didn't think too much, but all right. You played a team like that you played pretty well against all year. Then they go in a back-and-forth high-scoring affair with the Rangers that they lost in overtime. Something I will mention their overtime play a little bit later on in this. And then the games you can't lose begin. Lose 4-2 to Montreal. Lost. Was it 4-2? Maybe it was 4-1. Actually, 4-1 to Montreal. I'm sorry. Corrected. Then they lose to Chicago, which was even worse. You got a game you were never really in. You lost 5-1. They absolutely slapped you around. Lose to the Isles in overtime in a game where they played probably their worst period of the year in that second period, or arguably their worst. Maybe not their worst because that Tampa game happened. But in a game where we saw the next part of the Flyers saga, Ivan Fedotov, welcome aboard. Flyers may have found their knight in shining armor after losing Carter Hart. We never thought we'd see this guy play. Dana Briere working more magic behind the scenes. Finds a way to get this guy out of the KHL after all the crap this poor guy has gone through with the Russian military. It looked like he was going to be stuck there. There was fights between the Flyers and his KHL team between his rights. So it looked like at the end of the day, this is a guy that's just never going to have a true opportunity to get here. And then behind the scenes, he suddenly had his contract terminated. I'm like, wait a minute. Why did this happen after just a year ago? We thought we were never going to see this guy. It just seems that Briere worked some more magic and somehow got this guy over here. 27-year-old, 6'8" mammoth of a goalie. This guy, I am looking forward to seeing next season more. I'm not going to he hasn't played particularly great since he's come over here, but mind you, I give him every excuse in the world dealing with the crap that he went with overseas, being kidnapped by the Russian military. Not going to go too deep into that because that's not a spot I want to step into, but that obviously playing in a completely new arena. He didn't play for a month between seasons where he was in the KHL versus here. throwing right into a playoff mix where a team in front of you was not playing good hockey. And he played good in that Islanders game for the time he did play. I think he stopped those like 19 of 20 shots. Almost had the dam break down on him in his first period. Very first shot he ever faces as a pro was Matt Barzell in a breakaway and absolutely stoned him. I'm like, I like this guy. I like this guy. But Buffalo, he struggled. He struggled coming in relief in Montreal. But again, he's just come over from overseas. We're going to give this guy some real time. They also brought over Alexei Kolosov during this slump, who's now playing in the AHL. We're going to have to watch this kid develop a little bit. So Flyers goalie prospects are good. Losing Carter Hart long-term is going to have terrible implications, but short-term it did absolutely kill them. But anyway, they go on this 8-game losing streak after losing to the Islanders. Buffalo, where they severely outplayed them and then got goalied. Columbus, in my opinion, was their worst game of the year, or second worst. Tampa was probably the worst. But seeing what Columbus played out there against a bunch of farm workers and plumbers, you can't do that. And then the 9-3 just demolition from Montreal a couple of nights ago. That was just flat out embarrassing. The wheels came off in the second period. And then out of nowhere, last week on Thursday, they end up beating the Rangers 4-1. Shock us all. So, cause most of this, not to go too deep into things, that 8-game losing streak has put them in a position where they're on the outside looking in. Now we're in a spot. So we're going to be in a spot where the Flyers are going to need some help, as I stated prior. But overall, when I look at this season, you're probably asking, is it a success? Is it a failure? Especially being in a playoff spot for 4 months and then falling out of it. I consider it. You're going to get different opinions on this. But I personally consider it a success because they took a step. The locker room has been stabilized. This has been reported as one of the closest locker rooms in the league. John Tortorella has absolutely raved about this. And with all the crap that this team has dealt with off ice, it's really something that they have been able to pretty much keep this ship as stable as long as they have between the Carter Hart situation, the Cutter Gauthier saga, getting these goalies over there and having the spotlight over that. I mean, John Tortorella is a story in its own. He's going to bring attention whenever he does anything because Torts is the biggest but funnest, in my opinion, personality in the NHL. I love Torts, even if he has made some questionable decisions that even I will criticize. But some of the things being the overtime lines that he sends out there, I can't stand. The continuous play of Mark Stahl, Eric Johnson, and Igor Zamula over when they were in a pinch with their defensive injuries, which we didn't even bring up yet, with Drysdale, Sealer, and Ristolainen all going down in less than a 2-week span. When those three guys went down, it was a situation where the Flyers were completely undermanned. Travis Sanheim and Cam York were playing top-notch minutes, which may have drained into them during this losing run that they went on. They played probably over 23 minutes a night, where you can't really give a lot of these guys behind you as much because they either have inexperience or are completely washed. But one guy I want to mention that I haven't mentioned that happened at the trade line was Sean Walker, who will lead me into my next topic. Players that were the biggest surprise, players that were the biggest disappointments, and who my MVP is this year. I got a couple guys that I want to mention on the thumbs up perspective, and one of them is Sean Walker. Even though he was only here until the early March when we traded him over to Colorado for a first-round pick on an expiring contract, showing that Danny Briere is still sticking with the plan of this long-term rebuild. Sent him over to Colorado, picked up a first-round pick, and you got him in that Ivan Provorov trade. It's just as a throw-in. And he was fantastic here. Great penalty killer. He made a lot of clutch goals. Was always in good position. Never made many mistakes where I look at it, I was like, what the hell are you doing? He was a guy this year that I was very happy to see just mesh in with this team. Him and Nick Sealer were a great pair together, and it was unfortunate they had to let him go. But he was definitely someone that really caught me by surprise and really showed his value to this team, and it helps them now long term because now they have for the third straight year they're going to have 2 first-round picks. Last year, this and next, but seeing him walk was a little disappointing in the playoff push. But I was all for it for what the plan is for this team long term. Great player. Didn't really show too much on the stat sheet, but he did a lot of things that you don't see on the ice. As I said, positioning, lack of turnovers, shot blocking, just smart hockey, eating up a ton of minutes and gaining the trust of John Tortorella. This guy was great this year, in my opinion. He never really had many plays I look at where I said, you can't do that. Another guy I want to mention, Tyson Forster. This kid has been awesome since December. So he came out of the gates a little rough. He started off the year a little wanky. Took him about a month to get that first goal in that home game against Vegas. It was actually November 18th. He only had, I believe, 2 points in his first 15 games, and it looked like, oh, man. But Wade was the guy we saw for 8 games last year. He put up 7 points and looked like he was ready to go balls to the wall. But after he finally got that monkey off the back, a few games later, he started clicking, starting in that Carolina game. He started going on a little bit of a run. He picked up he got 6 points in 4 games starting on that Carolina game. He had a 2-goal game against New Jersey, picked up a goal against the Penguins in back-to-back games. This kid's got one hell of a shot. And he's really shown as someone who could be here as a top 6 contributor for the long term for this guy. He's smart with the puck, incredible shot. He does a lot of I think he has very underrated puck handling. It seems like he's a guy that can create his own space sometimes. It's not like to the point of like a Morgan Frost who seems like he opens up the play quite a bit, where he's going to be someone like, oh, wow, Morgan Frost, what a deke. He's creating his own play. But I feel like it's not something that's talked about enough, where Forster does open up that room for him sometimes. And, he's a smart player. He's a smart kid. He's just turned, I think he's only 22 years old, rookie year, 20 goals, 13 assists, 33-point season for a rookie. If Connor Bedard wasn't Connor Bedard, I think he would have a real argument to be a finalist. I don't think he will be a finalist for the Calder, even though he's got 20 goals. There's guys like Fader and Rossi, Luke Hughes, Logan Cooley that are all mentioned. But I think he deserves to at least be mentioned as a guy who deserves to be a possible finalist, just not quite there, just because of that bad start. But it seemed like after that game against Carolina on November 28th, he really turned a quarter and started finding his game. There would be points that he'd go like a little cold streak. Even now, the last couple games late in the season, he's gone a little cold, but he really picked it up from a goal-scoring perspective when the calendar year turned. He had a great January. He picked up, I believe, 8 goals that month. So he loves playing the Pittsburgh Penguins for some reason. He loves playing that team. I'm sorry, not January. January into February, he had 8 goals. But I think he potted 4 or 5 goals against them this year. He's just seems like a guy who is going to be there long term to make big plays against big opponents. Then I look at just how he filled in with clutch moments. He had one absolutely beautiful shot later in the year against Boston before the 8-game losing streak happened, where he had a massive snipe with a minute and a half to go, an absolutely clutch shot. This guy's shot is something that makes me think he could have 30-goal potential, maybe even more. Top 6 for sure. So rookie year, getting 20 goals, still 2 games left. He even missed 2 weeks with a foot injury in February. So it gives me a little optimism that this kid really is going to be here to stick long term. Tyson Forster definitely is a thumbs-up player this year. Another guy I want to mention is Cam York. He took on a top-line role this year and absolutely flourished in it. His analytical numbers aren't exactly fantastic, but again, another guy who does a lot of things off the paper that really stand out. I think he has 10 goals this year. Good always seems like he's in position. He does make a mistake here and there, but obviously when you're playing against higher-end talent but an elevated role, that's going to tend to happen, especially at his age. I think he's only 23, but he's going to be a guy that's going to be sticking here for a long time. the Flyers have some good defensemen here that are going to be growing, and Cam York really took that step forward playing with Travis Sanheim for the majority of the year, especially when the team was dealing with their injury bug, and him and Sanheim are literally the only guys left from the D-core that really stabilized this year. When Drysdale went down with injury, Ristolainen, who's still not back, went down with a mysterious upper body injury. He might be dealing with something similar to what poor Nolan Patrick did with migraines. I hope he ends up making a full recovery. I don't think we're going to see him again this year regardless, even if they do make the playoffs. Sealer, when he messed up his foot, and then obviously losing Sean Walker to trade, it was just those two guys. And then Mark Stahl, Zamula, who's been mediocre at best this year. And then you're putting kids like Adam Ginning and Ronnie Attard in elevated second line roles right out of the AHL. York stepped up, ate a lot of minutes, played good hockey, never really seemed to make those bad mistakes, was all over the ice. He's actually an underrated puck handler from where he is. Great lockdown defenseman. I think he's going to be someone that ends up being stable in this team's top four for a long time. I think could be a number two D-man. I don't know if he's going to be a number one, but if you have him and Drysdale with number two potential, it really shows that once you get that final piece, the true number one defenseman, whether it is maybe York or Drysdale, I'm not going to put that pressure on them to definitely be that. But if they can end up being that, that would be huge long-term for this team. And then the last thing I want to mention is not a player in perspective, but a group. The Flyers penalty kill, even despite the last month, its struggles, was fantastic this year. They were at one point first in the league. I think they're down to fourth or fifth now. They have dropped off quite a bit from where they were, but they have 15 shorthanded goals this year. 15. This team, in the first two-thirds of the year, were a threat on the penalty kill because of their aggressive style of play. And that all goes to the work of, oh God, I'm blanking on the assistant coach's name. Not Rocky Thompson. He's the one I want to blame so much. But it all goes to the assistant. I'm blanking. Oh, Bradshaw. That's who it is, Bradshaw. This goes all the work of Bradshaw and his work on the penalty kill. He's been absolutely fantastic. These guys have been great on the kill. They have not ever, for the first two-thirds of the year, were absolutely excellent on the kill. They were the top in the league at one point, as stated. They were shorthanded threats. Sean Walker was one of those guys. Travis Konechny had a couple shorties. Scott Lawton buried a couple. And they're still over 80% on the kill in an elevated scoring era. I think they're 82, 83%. It has dropped down, like I said, a little bit, where they were at 86, 87% at one point. But they're still, as a whole, looking as a pretty good PK unit. It's been a massive step in the right direction, where it used to be one of their biggest weaknesses for a long time. Big kudos to them. Guys like Nick Seeler, who's the ultimate shot blocking machine warrior. I freaking love this guy for how much he gives this team. Outside of one wet fart that he had in Ottawa, I really had no complaints about him either. So I'll give him a little bit of an honorable mention. But the penalty kill as a whole has been fantastic. Now for three guys who have been a little bit of a letdown this year. And it pains me to say this first guy because I loved him. I loved when they first got him. They got him actually on my birthday 3 years ago, but Cam Atkinson looks like he has nothing left in the tank. And it sucks because Cam has been one of the nicest, awesome dudes on that team. He's always optimistic. He's always full of good spirits. He's a genuinely great person. And I wish him the best. I think we are seeing his final year here as a Flyer. I would be quite surprised if he does not get bought out. But, we'll see. He still has a year left on that contract. Maybe they do run it and try to see what they can dangle for him for trade value next year, although I think that'll be minimal. But it's a shame what's happened to him. He has not recorded a single point since after the All-Star break, and it sucks. And now, mind you, he has had his share of healthy scratches in that time frame, but he looks like he just has nothing left in the tank. He's slow. He doesn't really seem like he's in the right spot at times. He takes a lot of lower quality shots. He just can't get out of this rut he's been in since the All-Star break. And, it stinks because he's one of the veterans on this team, and a lot of the time meets everyone. It looks like it's met Cam. He came off of major neck issues, I believe, last offseason, where he missed all of last year, where he ended up actually, funny enough, getting surgery from some of the doctors off the ice. Off the Flyers medical staff, which I get with how they've been for so long. But it's a shame. I hope Cam the best. I would love to see him pot a goal in these final 2 games if he plays. He's a fantastic human being. And wherever he ends up next year, I hope him the best. I hope he finds his game again. If he stays here. And if he does, awesome. I hope he finds his game again here too. But he just looks like he's lost a lot. The power play. Where I mentioned the penalty kill as a plus, I mentioned the power play as a massive minus. This team's power play has been complete junk all friggin' year. For the 3rd year in a row, it looks like they're going to end last in the league in the power play. That's right. 3 years in a row last in the league on the power play. That's absolutely unacceptable. A little bit is on, Tortorella and his schemes. Rocky Thompson, though, is the main culprit in this. This team just seems like they can't win a puck battle on the boards. They don't seem like they can ever get high-quality bids. They have a hard time still entering the zone. It's a little better this year compared to last year, but it's still an issue entering the zone and getting set up. But this team's power play has been an absolute nightmare. They need more finishers. They need a Drysdale to pretty much, develop a little more into that true specialist power play quarterback. They need a net front presence, which they have not had really, in my opinion, since Wayne Simmons. I know James Van Riemsdyk was decent at it while he was there, but he was never the Wayne Simmons type of guy, who they're honoring tonight, as I stated, by the way. But, yeah, it's a shame. And that power play has been a mess. And that needs some significant changes. I don't know if they end up letting Rocky Thompson walk. We'll see. But that power play has been a nightmare. And number 3, I kind of was so about putting this guy here because he had a great first half, but he has really fallen off hard in the second half, and that's Sean Couturier. Got named the captain of the team, funny enough, right before the Stadium Series game against the Devils. First half of the year, he looked like Coots of old. They were playing in him. He was playing great defensively. He had a good start to the year. He was putting up decent numbers. Looked like he was probably put up about a 20-goal season at first, but then as the year went on, he started fading. He started getting fatigued. Now, I don't put that fully on Sean Couturier. I still think he can be a good player. But he's missed 2 full seasons practically, well, almost 2 full seasons with major back surgeries. He has had 2 or 3 procedures, 2 of them being major on his back. And I can see with the mileage he already has, missing 2 years, where the wear and tear may have kicked in, the minutes that he got in the first half of the season. I still think there's something left in the tank for Coots. He is definitely not worth $7.75 million. I don't care how well he elevates himself, but he can still put up, I think, good middle 6 numbers if you manage his minutes enough after this offseason. I want to give him a break to an extent, so that's why I'm only putting him at number 3, because his back issues have been an excuse, I'll say, for why he's taken that step back significantly. Maybe not significantly, but I hope he's going to be better next season once he has less minutes, running middle 6 numbers, because he's not a 1C anymore. He's not. He just isn't. You can maybe work him a little bit at 2C. You probably want to look at him more as a 3C, a PK guy, face-off specialist, which he still has. He can win a lot in the dot, still over 50% in the face-off circle, but he has to be managed better. You cannot run this guy 20 to 21 minutes anymore. That has to be cut to about 15, 16 at the most. So that way, at least he's not completely gassed once we move later stages of the season. My Flyers MVP this year, it's probably the safe answer, but I'm going to say Travis Konechny. 32 goals for the second straight year. He puts up a career high in goals. He did miss a little bit of time with an oblique injury. I think he missed about 2-ish weeks. I still think he's playing hurt. He hasn't been quite the player he was once he came back. He isn't really able to make some of the moves that he can or twist his body the way he is. I think that oblique is still bothering him to a certain extent. But a 32 goal, near 70-point season, he definitely is, in my opinion, the Flyers MVP this year. He might not be done. He might put up another goal or 2 in these final 2 games. I actually had him potentially putting up 40 goals this year the way he was going early in the year. He did fizzle a little bit, and obviously he did miss 2 weeks, so that hurt him a little bit. But he was a guy that I want to give him a chance. I don't know what you're going to see for him in an extension, if he's extended or not, but he had a good year, and I want to think that we'll get the old Travis Konechny back once he gets a chance to heal up and get back to normal. He's only 27. He's entering his prime. He is in his prime, actually, right now. So, GK, overall, for about 80% of the year, was balls to the walls. Recently, he's been a little bit of a struggle. He did score on Thursday against the Rangers, so hopefully it can help him in this final playoff push. But yeah, he is my MVP of the year. I think he had, as stated, had a good year as a whole. All right, so let's see what's ahead. Final thing to talk about. What's ahead for the offseason and my predictions. I'm just going to state this, assuming that the Flyers do not make the playoffs. If they do, awesome. We're going to have another one of these shows. If not, we'll probably have a little bit of a break before episode 2, where we do a full offseason breakdown. But we'll see how that goes. Flyers offseason look ahead. So this team is going to have some decisions to make with some of these guys. Main guy on this roster is Scott Lawton. Do you bring him back? Do you trade him? There's teams out there. Last year, there was a rumor that the St. Louis Blues were willing to offer a first-round pick for Watts, which, in my opinion, I would have jumped on in a heartbeat. But the Flyers declined. It is what it is. So I think there's a real chance that they could revisit that this offseason. We could see him getting potentially moved. A team like Buffalo makes a lot of sense. That needs some veteran center leadership there. I could see a team like St. Louis maybe kicking the tires again on him again. Minnesota could use some middle six center help. So that's a guy I could see potentially being on the move. I think Cam Atkinson gets bought out. I think that's like a 90% chance that happens. You could buy out Pettersson too, but I don't know if the Flyers want to have 2 more guys eating salary on them. But maybe with the $4.5 million cap increase, we could see them both get bought out. But I think Cam Atkinson is likely seeing his last 2 games as a Flyer coming up. And then maybe Cal Pettersson too, but I'm a little less confident on that. I think they just let his final year run out in the AHL and let him walk to wherever. He's not an NHL quality goalie. We all know that. Another prediction, or another need, I should say, is the Flyers need to find a 1C. The only real center I see them having long-term future here for a young talent is Morgan Frost, who I almost put as a plus for this year. I probably would have if I didn't put the PK there. I only wanted to limit it to 3 on each. But Morgan Frost, despite being healthy scratched quite a bit in that first month and a half of the season, has kind of found his game a lot better. He's doing a lot of the right things. His stick handling is absurd. He's probably one of, if not the only guy on this team that can truly open up space on his own. Just when his stick handling and his deking and dangling abilities. He's had a few beauties. He had that one between the legs goal against Boston a few weeks ago that was absolutely grotesque in a game that the Flyers did lose, but got them within 1. Absolutely marvelous goal, went between the legs. Top shelf, I think it was on Jeremy Swayman. But he's probably got so much untapped skill, but he can't be the only one. I don't want him running 1C numbers yet. I would not be surprised if the Flyers try to move 1 or 2 of these first-round picks to try to acquire a long-term potential 1C, or maybe a long-term center in general. Nikas in Carolina, with all the potential guys they have expiring, is one guy I could potentially see them going after. Another guy who's been mentioned quite a bit is Trevor Zegras out in Anaheim. You know, the Flyers and Ducks, even before that Gauthier trade, have had a history of working out trades. That's one of the teams they seem like they have some possibility of working out a trade with. And maybe even for a young guy, I think this one's a lot less likely, but maybe you knock on Columbus's door, who's another team they've been able to make some moves with, and maybe see if Cole Sillinger's available. That's a guy that I've liked a lot there. I think he could use a fresh start. Lundell, maybe in Florida. I think he's got a lot of talent as well, a lot of untapped potential, but being behind Barkov and Bennett really limits him. It's a kind of got in a situation that Tippett had in Florida, where he needed the opportunity to provide a chance at top 6 minutes where he was in a logjam and really couldn't, so they moved him. And you look at him now here, he's got another career high in goals this year, 28 goals. Only reason why I didn't put him on the plus this year is just because at this point it's kind of expected that he's going to do this. But yeah, so they definitely need to get some real center help. If not in free agency, maybe a guy at the draft. So we'll see where they end up in the draft and take it from there. But I also think they need that right wing is fine. We don't need to touch that. They have plenty of right wingers all over this team, but I wouldn't mind trying to get maybe a middle 6 left winger, even if it's just a guy to help until this team's ready to bring some guys up. Sama Tamala might be up next year. He's a possibility. Deborah Barkey might be fighting for Ross's spot next year. He's been absolutely fantastic in London, had a 102-point season out there. And, maybe even you got to make sure you re-sign Fedotov. I'm still calling him Fedotov. But make sure you re-sign Fedotov. He should be a priority. And then the Travis Konechny stuff. Is he going to get extended here? Is he going to be here long term? Or do they potentially even dangle him in a trade if they feel like it's best for this team long term and maybe get a haul for the guy? He's going to be 28 next year, and that's when his contract runs up. And then you got to make a decision. How much is this guy going to want? How much do we sign him for? It is a real possibility he does get moved. I think it's more likely they do end up extending him. Tortorella loves this guy, and he's going to be back behind the bench next year. The front office seems to love him. I like Konechny a lot, but I do worry about his later years if you do sign him to an extension because he has that Brad Marchand style of play where you're in the boards, battling a lot, getting beat up, and he could see his prime pretty much go in the wrong direction at 31, 32 and really start falling off around that age. So that does worry about me in the middle years of a long extension. I don't think you should give him $9 million. I could see maybe $7.5 million at top at most. I would prefer something like that, maybe 6 years. And then if he still has something left, he can maybe get one more contract for three or so years if he can still show that he has something left in the tank, whether it's here or elsewhere. But most I'm giving to him personally. I want to avoid an 8-year contract, maybe go 5 or 6 more years at, say, $7.5 million tops. But we'll see how that goes. And then we look at, obviously, Mitchkov's not going to be here yet. He's still got another 2 years. This team's primary plan with the offseason, the draft, is to make sure this team is title contention ready, or at least ready to make a true run. The year Mitchkov gets here in 2026, 27, in my opinion, that is the primary plan. Make sure you know who that solidified number 1 goalie is, whether it's Kolosov, whether it's Fedotov, whether it's Sam Ersson, whether it's another guy out overseas. They've got a few other guys who are still there. I'm blanking on the guy's name. It starts with a Z, who's been absolutely marvelous in the lower levels out in overseas. He's putting up like a 9.945 save percentage. Someone like Dylan or Jamie could probably help me out with this. I'm not too keen on him too much. But anyway, besides the point. So primary things this year, I think Lawton get my final predictions. I think Scott Lawton gets moved. They get maybe some draft capital or maybe a young player for him who's ready to play now. I think Cam Atkinson gets bought out. And a surprise move, I could see Joel Farabee get traded. Now this one I'm not as confident in, but if they're really keen on getting a young center right now who's ready, I try to avoid trading Morgan Frost because you have no one else really in the pipeline or ready right now to play center that's young. And maybe you dangle a guy like Joel Farabee out there to see if someone's interested. He's got 22 goals this year. He's got almost about a 50-point year. So that's a possibility to see if you can get a young center, maybe Farabee, a first-round pick, and maybe something else. If you want to make a push at a guy like Zegras, or maybe not quite as much for Lundell, but Maybe a guy like that or Nikas or something like that. I do think they're going to end up bringing in a young center. I don't know who yet. We'll see how that goes along. But as I said, I think Lawton's gone. I think Atkinson's gone. I think the bottom six, other than that, is pretty solidified. I don't think you're going to see any other major moves. My prediction is I think Konechny is going to get extended. I don't think he ends up getting moved. They'll sign Fedotov, and then hopefully they can get some of these younger kids up that I mentioned prior into the lineup. I'd love to see Denver Barkey potentially make the team out of camp. Bobby Brink's another one. You got to make sure this kid's ready to go full time. He's been playing now more, and with Atkinson and Lawton gone, potentially, I think it'll open up some room for a guy like this. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, hopefully we're talking about playoffs a little bit further down the line. I don't think it's likely. I give them about a 10-15% chance at most. We'll see. But hopefully we're talking about playoffs further down the line. That is it. That is my Flyers season recap. I hope to see you all, and take care. Let's go Flyers.